We're going to skip to chapter 9. All right, everybody ready?
Yep.
It's going to be a big jump. From the middle of chapter 7 to the end of chapter 7. Remember, last week we were preparing for Yom Ha'atzmaut.
We start with
The
middle chapter
69th birthday of the miraculous state of Israel, of which we have a question, and that is, can the modern state of Israel be the beginning of redemption? Right? So we celebrated the 69th year, which means we're in the 70th year. Now, I don't know what this means, but one should remember that when the Jews were sitting in Persia and in Babylon, they were waiting for the 70th year to return and build the second temple. So we're right now at the beginning of the 70th year of already being there. I don't know what it means, but I think it's good. So with that, I'm just in a good mood because of Yom Ha'atzmaut. That's all. Okay. So we are on page 68, right? At the top, right? We're in a chapter 7, which asks the question, aren't Zionists guilty of shaving off the side locks of religious Jews and causing thousands to abandon their faith? That's the question we're dealing with today.
Where the question is?
In the beginning.
It's at the beginning of page 68, chapter 7. Today we have a broader historical perspective. It's easier to examine the outcome of events that occurred 60 years ago, or in this case 69 years ago. Some rabbis in Eastern Europe opposed Zionism because they did not want to expose the religious youth to secular influences. What eventually happened to those who stayed behind? Either they perished in the Holocaust, the Shoah, or suffered spiritual atrophy under communist rule. All the rest immigrated to America, Western Europe, or Israel. Did people abandon Judaism less in America than they did in Israel? It's an important question to ask. Right? And by the way, this paragraph deals with a very, very important question. Right? What was the reasoning? Some rabbis in Eastern Europe opposed Zionism because they did not expose religious youth to secular influences. This is a concern that always exists, right? And
it's a very interesting thing.
And one might argue that our fear of exposing youth to secular influences may actually be a failing of our own weakness. Now, there always has been temptation, and there have always been problems, and this isn't certainly as much or more so than it has ever been. But if we make our religious commitment a tiresome chore rather than an exciting experience, we should be aware, we should be very concerned about those influences. And so I think it's up to parents to give to their children a Judaism that is filled with love, that is filled with desire, that is filled with an appreciation of what we are, what we have become, and what we are today. And there is no greater time in our history than today.
But
really.
It's not only parents,
With
it's
all
a
the
society
challenges.
you choose to live with your child.
And not just society, it's education
Soci-
too.
Yeah.
It's
Because,
sure the choice of
If
education.
we're talking about from community, so kids are going to school and they're quite lot. It's
Yeah.
a lot of long hours.
There is a lot of what appears in my eyes to be dysfunctionality in how we raise our children. A kind of abnormality built around the idea of fear of the outside world rather than strength of our own world. And I think that, you know, you cannot create a prison mentality for your children and expect them to think this is an optimal situation at the end of the day. This is not an easy problem to solve.
By the way, if you take, can I interrupt you just for a second? If you take the marshal of prison, we know that people who live in prison, they actually find it much more comforting than the world.
They can find it discomforting to leave the environment they're in. That's true. And that's true in prisons. You know, sometimes people who are held hostage are uncomfortable leaving their hostage takers and begin to identify with them. But these are all clearly very dysfunctional examples, you know, and not appropriate choices for how you want to raise a child in what we genuinely believe to be the greatest gift that God has given to the world, which is His Torah and His belief system, you know, and an understanding of the universe. This shouldn't be a burden. This should be a joy. Right? And if the only way we can keep our children within the environment of Yiddishkeit is, you know, by imprisoning them, we should not expect that it will work indefinitely.
Don't be surprised, because strongest and most intelligent will push away.
And you know, and what we see here is part of this process, right? Is that they were worried about if my children end up growing up in Israel, right? That's the worst possible thing that could happen to their Yiddishkeit. Well, you know, I'm not sure that's true, you know, and I think that the author will address this now. The entire world underwent tremendous upheavals at that time because of the war, emancipation, and widespread immigration, mostly to places other than Israel. All these things rocked the Jewish world, the Jewish nation as well. Irrespective of Zionism, many Jews left the fold, much to our chagrin. It is very easy to evaluate the various options that existed at the time when we contemplate the current state of Judaism throughout the world. We can look back and see how good those decisions were. You know, at the time, people were saying, well, what are my choices? I'll keep my family in the shtetl. I'll move to Vienna and live amongst non-Jews and become a Reform Jew. I'll emigrate to Canada or the United States or France, you know. Those are choices I have. Or maybe I'll, you know, endure the hardships of Israel, you know. Let's compare those Jews who listened to the anti-Zionist rabbis and settled in America to those who emigrated to Eretz Israel. Are American Jewish youth more religious today than their counterparts in Israel? Only a small minority of Jewish communities in diaspora are Orthodox, and even smaller percentage of individual Jews are religious. Israel, on the other hand, has a much higher Orthodox and non-Orthodox ratio. In Chutz La'aretz, non-religious Jews are assimilating at an unprecedented rate. A Jew who settled anywhere outside of Israel after the war could very easily discover that his grandchildren are not even Jewish, God forbid. Many diaspora Jews attend Reform temples and eventually sever all ties with Judaism. In Israel, non-religious Jews are much more aware of their Jewish identity. For the most part, they do not defile themselves with forbidden foods or intermarry. They are familiar with all the Jewish holidays and enter into matrimony according to Jewish law. Furthermore, the percentage of Jews returning to traditional Judaism in Israel is much greater than in Chutz La'aretz.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. The people in Israel are very equipped to find themselves attracted to Yiddishkeit. They know the original language in which these things were written. It's a spoken language in Israel, right? They find themselves taking days off in Israel that are, stat holidays in Israel are consistent with the Jewish calendar, right? There are many things that make it possible. There are things that make it very objectionable. And God willing, those things will be overcome. The other thing is that within a Jewish state, a Jewish life eventually will become normal. Not now, because we're still dealing with all of these issues that we've talked about many times, and all of the struggles. But the eventual process, right, is there will become a normality. There will become a kind of, B'nai Akiva's style of life, his Mizrahi style of life, where many Jews are able to live a relatively normal life and still be shomer mitzvahs. Right? It's not an impossible thing. It's very stressful to do it in the diaspora.
I think what they need is Sunday.
That's a whole other question.
No, the Shabbos.
No, it's another question. I don't want to get into that question right now.
I think
It's a question itself. What?
They do?
I think they started something.
Yeah, it's
this
coming.
Sunday.
It's coming, yeah. Obviously, we are not saying the situation in Israel is ideal. It is actually very lamentable. Hundreds of thousands of Gentiles are immigrating to the land, and the Holy Sabbath continues to be trampled underfoot. However, taking all that into account, our spiritual state here in Israel is far better than that of any other Jewish community in the world. We sorely lament the spiritual decline that came in the wake of the Enlightenment, but Zionism had nothing to do with it.
It's a very interesting point.
On the contrary, Zionism halted the decline to a large degree, providing a ray of hope for most of those who were privileged to ascend and build the land. If you just pause for a second and imagine the unimaginable, there was a time when the unimaginable would be the Jews had sovereignty in their own state, next year in Yerushalayim. Right? It was really something we said, but it was unimaginable. Now imagine a different unimaginable. Imagine a world without the state of Israel at all. Right? It would be disastrous, and I'm not talking about simply for life and limb. It would be disastrous for Yiddishkeit. It would be awful. Israelis carry with them a pride, a national pride that is Jewish. And with that comes all the other elements, some in greater degrees and some in lesser degrees. But it's there. A world without it, right, it would be a disaster. Thank God for the Zionists. And I mean it from a religious point of view.
Can I ask you a question? When Herzl was considering Jewish state, he wasn't specifically, focusing on Israel. It was different consideration. Whatever place...
He simply had a consideration that the Jews had to be like other nations, that they could not be assimilated
They have
into...
a space.
The Dreyfus Affair convinced him.
Yeah.
He looked at it...
But my point, it's a safe place.
there were two Dreyfus trials. Right?
No, I didn't know.
Dreyfus was convicted on false evidence, right? And sent to Devil's Island, right? And then Emile Zola, Jacques, accused, right? And France was torn apart. It was almost like a civil war in France over it, right? And they had a second trial. And the same despotic, anti-Semitic general staff now found Dreyfus guilty a second time. But by now, the nation was so torn that I think he was pardoned, actually, brought back from Devil's Island after the second conviction, pardoned. He served France in the First World War. Colonel Dreyfus did, or Captain Dreyfus. And I think he died in the 1920s in France.
For some reason, I thought he was killed.
No.
Continue to send this lecture to you.
Okay, but later.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very interesting.
And this was what Herzl witnessed, and it changed his whole point of view. He was writing for, quite frankly, the New York Times in every sense of the word of Austria at the time. It was, I think, called the New World, and it was a newspaper, an Austrian newspaper owned by Jewish families who were very hostile to Jewish dreams and pretending that they weren't really part of that world. And Herzl was writing for this newspaper. It's like writing for the New York Times today, frankly. And the experience of the Dreyfus trial said, It's not going to happen. We will never be Austrians. We will never be Germans. We will never be French. We have to be able to defend ourselves like any other nation does. And so somewhere we have to build a Jewish nation.
Yeah,
right?
and it was
with a Jewish army and a Jewish
My point is,
Olympic team.
from point of view of Judaism, if it would be how required we are to be on that specific piece of land.
So it would have failed. It just simply would have failed. That's why they didn't settle on Israel really Herzl. I don't think, because Israel was the most perfect place in mind. You know, it's a desert and it was a swamp and there's everything wrong with it. They settled on Israel because it was something that you could rally Jews to of all stripes. And it turns out that it worked. Right? And we know that the people that would most naturally be rallied to it were the ones who were least likely to go, which was those people who every day sat at their tables, Pesach and Yom Kippur, and said, next year in Jerusalem. Right? And those who said, I'm going to university, and when I have a gap year, I'm going to go to this place, Palestine, and clean the swamp and build a moshav and a kibbutz, right? You know, and what do I know from Judaism, except that my mother and father are? Those are the people who rallied to it. And they likely would not have rallied to Uganda, right? Because there's a poetry and there's a dream and there's a spiritual connection that Jews know they have for 3,000 years, regardless of what UNESCO says.
That sooner or later, somebody will come and claim, you know what, it's still not your land. And our land, it's Eretz Israel, there is nothing to do. It was something on news a couple of days ago. Some Italian, very, very rich lady, she and her husband, they bought some piece of land in some of the African countries. And they do something with the animal, protecting animal and land and some kind of... Anyway, a couple of days ago, they shot her. Because they said, it's not your land, it's our land, and we need it for the agriculture.
Right. Yeah.
And actually, she did good. People used to come and pay for this, and she asked for them nothing. She gave them money just to preserve the piece of land, and they just shot her. This is ours. We need it for our needs.
Yeah, I think that
it's exactly the same would be with Jews.
Yeah. And if you imagine for a second, to take Guy's point, is, you know, the Bible that is sacred not just to Jews but to the Christian world and acknowledged by the Muslim world. Right? This Bible describes clearly that this is our land that God gave us. It's very clear. Right? You may argue that we violated our covenant with God and consequently we lost it. There's a lot of things. But the Bible itself says this was the land for Abraham and for the Jews. Right? And when I say the Bible, I'm including Tanakh, which is part of the Christian Bible as well. The writings and the prophets all make it very clear.
Do you think it was a reasonable
Imagine for a second, right? If today UNESCO says, well, the Jews have no connection to Israel, and they do say it, they just passed another one, and Jerusalem has no connection to the Jews. Imagine what would have happened with downtown Kampala in Uganda if we said that's our home, you know, or a place in Peru, that's our home, right? You know, how long would we have lasted there before the world said, get them out, send them back to wherever they came from, Auschwitz, right? That would have been the result, right? We have a claim on Israel that when UNESCO says the Jews have no connection to the land of Israel, everybody in that room knows that it's not credible, that it's a lie. They still pass it as a political piece of hatred. But nobody thinks. To say the Jews don't have a connection to Israel is to say that the Christians don't have a connection. You know, that Jesus, who is Jewish, has no connection to Israel. Right? Nobody believes it. They pass it, but that's just straight Jew hatred and anti-Semitism. Right? From a point of view of historical belief, I don't think anybody can really seriously believe it.
But you know what? If you think all this resolution they know they can do nothing. It's just to drive us nuts.
Yes.
They can do absolutely nothing.
I'm actually
Okay.
very worried about the propaganda. Palestinians show that if you repeat bizarre things,
They're on their way out. The world is changing for the good. They are on their way out.
I hope so, but it worked for a good 50
There is a government
years.
in Israel that has
70.
said enough is enough, and the American government has changed as well. I don't know where they will be at
For
the
how
end.
long?
You can't predict it.
For how long?
For 4 years.
Okay.
For 4 years, and a lot can happen in 4 years that is positive, right? Let's see what happens.
But you know what?
The president is meeting with the boss as we speak.
But still, it
He
started
met
with the
already.
left.
Nothing good came out of it.
Either way.
No, he was touching him, smiling to him.
Yeah, and Abbas was talking about we raise our children, in peace, to live in peace, right? Does anybody seriously believe it? Read his textbooks, right? Read his Facebook page. Nobody believes it, right? There's a moment of courtesy, but I think it's all, we have to be a little bit more positive. Things are going our way,
Sure.
And by the way, have been for the last 69 years. That's actually the point of this. Okay, let's continue. On the contrary, Zionism halted the decline to a large degree, providing a ray of hope for most of those who were privileged to ascend and build the land. Anyone who feels responsible for the Jewish nation as a whole, not just for the religious Jews, surely recognizes the vast difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, the diaspora. He certainly knows where more Jews abandon their faith and nationality, and where chances are greater that they will return to their traditional Judaism. Let's imagine a Jewish grandfather living in Europe 100 years ago, faced with 3 options. He wants to do whatever he can to ensure that his descendants remain religious and committed to mitzvahs. He can stay in Eastern Europe, immigrate to America, or ascend to Eretz Yisrael, where the secular Zionists are in control. It's interesting because it describes Ezra and compares him to Moshe Rabbeinu. Ezra, who was in Babylon, right? And he ascended to Eretz Yisrael to give the Torah to the Jewish people and to teach the Torah. Right? Mm-hmm. And the Chazal point out that Moshe Rabbeinu also ascended Har Sinai to bring the Torah back to the Jewish people. Now, many people, of course, ascended to Eretz Yisrael, right? Including, it's been pointed out, the Meraglim, the spies. Mm-hmm. So ascending is not by itself definition. But there was an idea of Ezra doing a similar thing to Moshe Rabbeinu in an ascent, right? Mm-hmm. And we always called this ascent Aliyah.
It's out of the topic, but I just want to ask another question. What Jewish people he was teaching? Who came from...
Who, Ezra?
Yeah. Who came from Babylon?
It's a very good question. Yeah, Ezra was part of a second Aliyah from Babylon.
They didn't teach?
Zerubbabel went with Haggai and I think Zechariah, maybe not, two Nevi'im, to Eretz Yisrael. And years later, maybe 30 years later, it's a little unclear, the king, who may have been Darius, may have been even Cyrus. It's unclear who he was. Artashasta, I think is the pronunciation. Wrote a document sending Ezra to Eretz Yisrael with the second Aliyah. The first Aliyah was made up really not of particularly holy people, particularly observant people. It was a tremendous mix. There were Levium, there were Kohanim, but there were many people, and the purpose was to build the Beis Hamikdash. Koresh wanted them to go and build the second temple and to pray to the God of Israel, who lives in Jerusalem, in Judah. Right? And years later, Ezra was commissioned to go with a group himself with the second Aliyah. Maybe, I don't know if it was as many as 10,000 people. He went there to teach it to the first group as well as the second group. The first Aliyah as well as the second Aliyah. That was his purpose.
So does it
And
mean
he
that
and there's
even
the people.
we have so many nice and good, very important yeshivas in Bavel, they still were very far away from Yiddishkeit.
Well, no, there were people who were very close to Yiddishkeit, but there were people who were also very far from it as well. Yeah, absolutely. Babylon, the Persian and the Babylonian exile was not a thing that was, in general, particularly good for Yiddishkeit. We see from who returned. Right? We know that there were centers of learning that were where Judaism survived in exile in Babylon. And by the way, it's a curious thing when you read the letter of the Persian king sending Ezra back. It seems clear that he had many motives as to why he did it. But one of those motives was to make Ezra his representative in Judea, and to make the Beis Hamikdash an outpost of the Persian Empire. Right? I'm paying for the sacrifices in your temple. Right?
I'm paying for the music, and you're going
We're dancing.
You dance, and I'll pay for the musicians. Yeah. So it's clear. It's very interesting. And he picked Ezra because Ezra was somebody of great repute. He had family dating back to, proving a lineage back to Aaron, the first Kohen. He left.
Ezra, yeah.
Yeah.
He was
Ezra,
from the,
oh yeah, yeah. And he arrived. I have to remember to get this right. He arrived in Israel on
First
the
of
yard
his
site
of Aaron
of
Cohen.
Aaron Cohen,
Yeah.
and he left Babylon on the yard site of Nadav and Abihu.
Yeah, first of his son.
No,
first of Av.
yeah,
First of Av.
yeah. And it may very well be he left in Nisan and arrived in Av. Yeah. And there are hints that he may have timed it that way. But he was making a statement, right? That with the yard site of Aaron Cohen, we begin again. But it's a very interesting thing to see the politics of it. The return and the building of the Second Temple was not outside of the Persian Empire. That everybody who left to go to Israel, this is something people from the former Soviet Union understand. We find it strange, Americans find it strange to say, well, you don't need any permission to move from New York to Florida, New York to California, right? If you're going to move from New York to Canada, it's another country. Right? But as anybody who lived in any police state, or especially the Soviet Union, knows the idea of internal passports that permit you to travel beyond your passport location to another one requires...
We can travel, but we cannot
settle.
settle.
Yeah, that's right. So that's exactly what happened with this second Aliyah. The king specifically says those people who are traveling with you have permission and encouraged to go to Judea, right, and to Jerusalem, right? That is to say, I'm issuing a permission for them to leave, where they are now and go to there. But they're not leaving the country, right? They're leaving one province and going to another province. Right? And Ezra is given the power, literally, of a governor and the life and death over everybody in Judea, meaning Jews and non-Jews, as a representative of the Persian government. It doesn't seem he exercises that power. Right? He's come specifically for Torah. Right? But the king has sent them for more than Torah. That's clear. Okay, let's move on. And I want to credit Rabbi Torchiner, Mordechai Torchiner, because we were just talking about this in his class on Ezra. Okay. We're imagining a Jewish grandfather, right? What is his safest bet? Here are his choices. Eastern Europe, stay in Eastern Europe, go to America, or ascend to Eretz Yisrael, where the secular Zionists are in control. What are his safest bets? Of course, a positive outcome depends mainly on a solid Jewish education, but that was not enough in those days. Even descendants of great rabbis and Hasidic masters were swept away by the winds of secularism that prevailed at the time. In any event, there is no doubt that those who came to Eretz Yisrael had the greatest chance of success. Sephardic Jews, Jews from the Arab lands, went through a similar process. Many Jews from North Africa chose France or South America over Israel. Is their religious state any better than that of their brethren who emigrated to the Holy Land? Many Yemenite Jews remained in Yemen, where they eventually converted to Islam,
Really?
dashing all hopes of ever returning to the Jewish people. Who really caused the current situation? Some people claim that Zionism put power and dominion in the hands of secularists. If not for Zionists, they argue, the Maskilim would never have taken control of the state, and it would have been harder for them to influence the youth. I will rebut this claim with one piercing question, says the author. Who is to blame for the fact that the religious are not in charge of the land? Just chew on that for a second. Who is to blame for the fact that the religious are not in charge of the land? Although we discussed this last chapter, let us briefly summarize the main idea once again. Our beloved God knocked on our door from the religious angle first. Rav Kalshner, Rav Guttmacher, and other harbingers of Zionism tried to awaken the nation even before the Enlightenment movement began. Listen to this. 64 years before Herzl came on the scene, these rabbis called for mass aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Had Orthodox Jewry been astute enough to take the initiative, religious Jews would now be in complete control of the Zionist enterprise.
They meant just to buy land and settle in small private, not as
Nobody began the process by nation building. Everybody understood that it was the Ottoman Empire. Right? The Ottoman Empire had existed for 1,000 years. Right? So the question was, would you have autonomy in the province, of Israel, of Palestine, and Syria? That was the question, right? Eventually, as it was crumbling and World War I was happening, things became more up in the air, and there were opportunities that came with that.
It's like Arafat, he never missed opportunity.
To miss an opportunity, right? That's right. Who said that? UN Ambassador Abba Eban. Right. Yeah.
It's exactly the case here.
But they neglected the mitzvah, but the religious neglected the mitzvah, leaving it for those who were prepared to accept the challenge. The generation of the wilderness and the Jews of Ezra and Nehemiah's time also passed up an opportunity for eternal redemption. But this time God gave the reins of the leadership to those who were able and willing to dedicate themselves to the cause. Are you listening to this? Right? The author is pointing out that this is not the first time it's happened, but maybe God decided to turn in a different direction. If they won't do it, they will do it. Right? And I will support that.
Yeah.
Clearly, whoever comes first gains control, and he has more influence than those who come later. Thus, who is primarily to blame for the mass flight from religion? The foundations and overall direction of the state were established at the time of the first two Aliyahs. Why didn't a majority of religious Jews emigrate at that time and lay the foundations for a religious state? It's a tremendously important question which we're struggling with, and we've talked about a number of times. But at the end of the day, even though he gives this to you in a very black and white viewpoint, when you look at the evolution of the state of Israel, To say that it is in the hands of the secularists means that they're very bad at doing their job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if Israel was created by people who were trying to make Jews not religious, they failed big time. There are more Jews more committed to Yiddishkeit, even if they are not what we might call, you know, shomer mitzvahs, but are raising their families, right, in a Jewish world, in a world in which, you know, they're eating matzah and Pesach, they're fasting on Yom Kippur, they're not working church. And at the end of the day, right, they have a reason to join an army, which is to protect the Jewish people, to protect the Jewish people of Israel, and to protect those of us who are not yet in Israel as well. You know, the idea protects Jews around the world. Its very existence does.
Yair Lapid actually said it. Do you remember? He said,
He was
"You
not the
won."
first.
He said, "Religious, you won. You won."
Right.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
He said during the election when he said, "You won. Now, put your shoulder, you know, under the burden and let's carry it."
Yeah, that's right. You know, the fact of the matter is that the, you know, religious Jews, and it's not just simply, you know, a birth rate thing. You know, God has His ways too. You're in my land, you're not in the fields, you're in the palace court, you will be influenced by it. We all know it, we all feel it when we're there. By the way, those of us who reject it, heaven forbid, have to work much harder to reject it in Israel than everywhere else. You know, it's not just simply, I'll ignore it, right? There you have to, like, you know, go against the tide. You know, look for chazer, you know, is what you have to do in that situation. Because it's in the air. It's in the land. It's in everything you eat, everything you do.
You know, a couple of days ago, I saw some documentary on Israel on TV. And they show Yom HaZikaron, and the people standing with the siren, and they show it in Jerusalem, Haredim. They just walking around just to show that we are not standing.
Yeah.
Some of them are jumping. But the most amazing, one guy, he was standing on four, like an animal, and he was walking around on four.
You know, this is actually my point, right? Is that, you know, when the siren blows here, right, in Canada, right, when it's blowing in Israel, we're conscious of it here. You know, if you don't take a moment to think about it, you know, or if you're an anti-Zionist and you decide, you know, now I'm going to play rock and roll music because the siren's going off in Israel, right? Nobody knows, nobody cares, it doesn't really matter very much, right? In Israel, you have to make an effort to walk around like an animal on all fours. You know, I saw a piece.
Can you imagine? Just to go on four
And somebody
and
film
just
it.
go around the people.
It's
just
unfortunate.
To show that
I saw another piece that said it's inappropriate to have a moment of silence. It's what non-Jews do at this time. Right? There's a very interesting article. The author, I believe, is a Chabadnik who said, you know, that the Rabbi of Lubavitch specifically said that if we can't have prayer in public schools in America, let's just have a moment of silence. In a moment of silence, people can do whatever they wish. Right? They can pray if they want to. They don't have to. Right? You know, he was very in favor of a moment of silence.
May I ask who's calling?
Right?
May I ask who is calling?
The
He cannot talk
you know,
right now.
so
He has a class.
the
Can you call
article
him
was
Thank you.
the article was dealing with it, and the author said, well, if it does trouble you, you know, to have a moment of silence, I guess you could all gather on this day, you know, when we're remembering those who fell to protect the Jewish state and the Jewish people, and say a couple of kapitel at Tehillim. But you don't do that either. So it's really not sincere when you say it's a Gentile acknowledgement at all. It's an unfortunate thing, but by the way, I have to tell you, when I think about all of these things, right? We have Yom Ha'atzmaut. We have a memory of people who fell to create the state of Israel, to protect the Jewish people, right? To give us the gift that we have today. They are partners with God in fulfilling the prophecy. We should recognize them in that light. Right? And it should be no more. There should be no more need for it.
But I have to tell you, even from the point of view, we know that it's inappropriate on funeral behave like at the wedding. There is a certain behavior in certain places. For example, you walking on a cemetery, it's not appropriate go and sing and be, it means if it's a moment majority of people feel in a certain way, how would you do that?
Because there's actually a need. What I was saying was, it's the difference between Chutz La'aretz and in Israel. If you're not going to be part of the society, you can't ignore it. A Jew who doesn't want to be Jewish in Canada doesn't have to make any effort.
No.
He just lives his life normally. A Jew who doesn't want to be a Jew in Israel, he has to really work at it. It's not simple. Whether he's saying I'm secular or he's saying I'm Haredi, I don't want to be part of your system, right? He can't just say, I'm staying home today instead of standing. Somebody, if you really felt that way, right, which is very hard for me to understand, but, rather than offend your neighbors, you could just stay at home and sit down. But a need to do it, right, is a statement about the reality of a Jewish state.
When
right? And that's all it is.
Canadian anthem being played, I would get up.
Yes, right. And we know
out of respect to the
we know that when American football players don't stand up for the anthem, it's a very big deal, right? And they're making a big deal. But what I'm saying is, in the state of Israel, right,
the Jew has to be extra specially.
You have to go out of your way. If you object to Yom Ha'atzmaut, heaven forbid, and if you object to remembering those who fell, in Yom HaZikaron, right, Day of Remembrance, right, so you stay home. That you have to go out and walk around like a dog or jump and dance and all that kind of stuff, right, actually acknowledges the importance of the state of Israel in a very kind of strange way. It would be much more painful, in some ways, right? But what they're saying is there's a state of Israel and I don't like it, right? There's, they can't deny there's a state of Israel at this point. They don't like the way it's acting. Many of us don't like the way things go on in the state of Israel, right? But thank God it's there, Yeah. When asked about, little children and holy books, the Rabbi, rather than say they should be punished, said we should be thankful for both.
That they're dropping the books.
Yeah, but thankful we have these children to drop the books, Okay. It's important to remember that even though many Zionist leaders declared that they wanted to do away with religion, they actually did the opposite. No religious Jewish community in the world thrives like the one in Eretz Yisrael. As we already mentioned, and will expand shortly, Zionism rescued the Jewish religion in a wondrous way. There's a deep but simple explanation for secular Zionism's failure to create a godless state. Although their mouths uttered one thing, their hearts knew the opposite to be true. Deep down, every Jew has Jewish sentiments, and even if he tries to cover them up and declares the opposite.
I remember many years ago I was at some rabbi, and he was giving this lecture, and he said that, I believe it was on Yom Ha'atzmaut, and he said, why we don't accept this country, because it was written Bezrat Shema, but they took it off. and everything is secular. We don't accept this. We have nothing against Jewish state, but the way how it was created. And yesterday was Yom Ha'atzmaut, and I'm sitting on the YouTube and I'm looking for this, and then I saw declaration of Jewish state.
By Ben Gurion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was listening through all this speech. And in the end of the speech, the entire room stood up and they said, Baruch Shehiyanu v'kimanu v'gianu b'zman
I
hazeh.
have a goosebumps.
The full version of the
You're right.
of the prayer. After they said the declaration, they said Shehiyanu v'kimanu.
Thank God that we have reached this time.
And this is secular Jews.
And this, by the way, and I will credit the
And it just shows
Rabbi
you that
Lubavitch saying
that
this.
sometimes
he
on the
said-
shurim, they don't. I'm not saying they don't say the truth, but they don't say it till the end.
The full truth. The full truth. And, I think that I'm always, touched by the stories of the Rebbe of Lubavitch's view of this. He did not think that there was such a thing as a secular Jew. Maybe there's a Jew who's not observant yet, right? But within every Jew, he felt that there was a unique, he called it pintoyet, an ember of something. And there's no place where that ember can be ignited more easily, more successfully, and more brightly than in the land that is the fuel of that ember, Eretz Yisrael. Right? And we see it, Yom Ha'atzmaut is not a celebration of a national entity. It's a celebration of a Jewish national entity. And it is very clear and it is very obvious.
Yeah, Moshe, I had a fantastic memory of Yom Ha'atzmaut in Israel.
Should we hold here?
Yeah, you have to go.
We'll go on to chapter 9
Yeah.
next week.
Because